he gave me a book on art forgery. I found myself drawn to these old masters. How did these artists take paint from a palette, arrange it on a canvas? I began to unlock the secrets. I was a storehouse of knowledge of how to create an illusion, present it to an experienced expert, manipulate his mind, and convince him and bring him to the inevitable conclusion that the painting is genuine. We flooded the market with my paintings, and I couldn't believe what I did. I couldn't believe it. Then the dominoes started falling, and eventually the FBI were led to my door. They uncovered a mountain of evidence against me.
But they never actually got you. At this point, you've sold a lot. You've got like $1 million in cash. You sold one painting for $717,000. Why did it go away? Why did you never get indicted? And how are we having this conversation?
I guess that's the greatest story of all.
To hear how Ken Perenni made millions in art forgery, dodged the mafia and the FBI, subscribe to The Jordan Harbinger Show and check out episode 282 in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now.
Do you love shows like Criminal Minds and Mindhunter? Are you interested in what it's really like for the agents that break down the psychology of violent offenders, serial killers, and sexual predators? If the answer is yes, you'll love The Consult, Real FBI Profilers. I'm Julia Cowley. I spent 22 years in the FBI and was assigned to the renowned Behavioral Analysis Unit. Join me, along with my colleagues, retired FBI profilers Angela Surser, Susan Kostler-Drew, and Bob Drew, as we look at some of the most notorious cases that have ever come into the Bureau. We'll take you inside the tape and into our thought processes as we analyze the behaviors, motives, and methods of criminals like JonBenet Ramsey's killer, serial killers like Israel Keys and Joe DeAngelo, and we'll examine some of the most perplexing cases, such as the murder of Washington, D.C. attorney Robert Wone. It's more than just a podcast. It's a real-world look at how the FBI uses criminal psychology to assist law enforcement in our mutual quest for justice. Join our brand new Patreon for early and ad-free episodes and listen to The Consult, Real FBI Profilers, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors. When he walked onto the plane that rainy day, he was anonymous, just another man in a suit. But when he jumped out the back of it, he became a legend. He called himself Dan, but you know him as D.B. Cooper. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my skyjacking co-host, Alice.
Brett, that you had a long list to choose from. I didn't know which one you were going to choose because, yes, you guys, Lidditz Elementary is back this time because they helped us think through one of the most famous and exciting cases in all of history, not just true crime history, in American history. And they wrote us out a bunch of descriptors for me that Brett had to choose from. So, Brett, who came up with that one?
That was Sawyer. Thank you so much, Sawyer, for coming up with that for us. And we had so much fun. Like Alice said, this year we were actually able to go to Lidditz Elementary, which was amazing. Meet with the kids, meet with the fabulous teachers who invite us to talk to them all the time. And we loved it so much and can't wait to go back. Thank you guys for your hospitality. It was amazing. By the way, I mean, I don't really want to give it away because I don't know if the people of Lidditz want me to give it away, but Lidditz is one of the most awesome little towns I've ever been to. If you're looking to move to Pennsylvania, check Lidditz out.
Quite literally. Like, we knew it was a town of 10,000 people and it would be cute. We didn't know it was literally voted the best small town in America a few years ago. And like, with only 10,000 people, I watch those Hallmark movies. I'm like, there's no way this cute small town in rural nowhere has all these amenities, right? They're like a state-of-the-art rock and roll facility and like the first pretzel ever made and the most delicious chocolate you've ever had. That happens in a Hallmark movie and you kind of roll your eyes like, sure, that happens in middle of nowhere America. It happens in Lidditz. Like, that was not an exaggeration. Everything I listed exists in Lidditz.
I mean, honestly, if I'd had my Christmas bingo for Hallmark movies, I would have got a bingo out of Lidditz. It was incredible. And I want to go back for Christmas because I think it probably is a Hallmark movie at Christmas. But I know you guys.
They have ice carving. They have ice carving.
do.
It is literally a Hallmark movie that we watched this year.
But I bet much better than that Hallmark movie. If the Hallmark movie had been there, it would have been so much more amazing.
It would have been 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. But real quick, how's my sound? Am I really loud?
You sound fantastic to me. I don't know what Joe's complaining
Someone
about.
said I was very loud. It might be my excitement about Lidditz, which you guys may remember. We actually have some sort of a history with Lidditz Elementary. This is our third or fourth year doing a case with them.
I think it's our third year.
I think
it's our third year.
Third year because we've only been in existence for 4 years. But let me just put this out there in the world again. This all started our relationship with this amazing town and amazing elementary because their incredible teacher listened to our podcast and thought, let me just email them and see if they'll want to talk to my class. And we say yes to everything. I don't think you guys realize this. We don't really have a life. We say yes to basically all requests. And we've only been asked a few times and we love it, especially talking to kids because they get so excited. They do good research. They do fantastic presentations. And we did this case with Lidditz Elementary and they came up with some awesome theories.
Yes. So, as always, whenever we talk to Lidditz, what we end up doing is doing some sort of interesting historical case. We've done the Orang Medan. Last year, we did the cosmonauts, the lost cosmonauts with the kids. And this year, they specifically requested one of the greatest mysteries in the history of the United States, the world, and true crime, D.B. Cooper and the money he took. And I am so excited to do this. I learned a lot I did not know about D.B. Cooper. D.B. Cooper is one of those people who, he's like an American icon. You learn about him as a child and you're not entirely sure where. Like, I don't know why I know who D.B. Cooper is, but I have always known who D.B. Cooper is. And obviously now I know a lot more about him.
I will just say, as an immigrant child who didn't know a lot of things about American history, I too knew D.B. Cooper. I don't think I knew the name D.B. Cooper went along with this image I had of a man with glasses and a suit jumping out the back of a plane with a briefcase. But I had that image in my mind. And then when I started researching this case, I was like, somehow, like, childhood Alice, who didn't even know what the Constitution said and what our branches of government were, knew D.B. Cooper. That says something about the infamy of this man.
And I want to take a moment to talk about that and why we know about him. There are people who listen to this podcast who want us to rush through it. They're like, they talk too much, which I've never understood what that means because it's literally a podcast. So we're not going to take a long time with this case. I mean, I'm thinking 2 episodes, 3 episodes, but we're going to take some time right now to set the stage because I feel like the stage needs to be set. If you don't know who D.B. Cooper was, we're going back to 1971. The late 60s and early 70s, we are talking about a traumatic time in America. And I feel like this is one of the reasons that D.B. Cooper became what he is. I mean, sometimes you see this. It's like Robin Hood in medieval England, right? It's a time, the 60s were this time of hope and change. If you've ever seen Field of Dreams, there's a great scene with James Earl Jones where he goes through sort of how, the 60s, it was this time of hope, and then they killed JFK, and they killed Martin Luther King Jr., they killed RFK. The age of love is over. Altamont has happened in San Francisco. There is The Vietnam War is coming to an end. It is going to be a defeat for the United States after tens of thousands of people were killed and over 100,000 injured, often in really horrific ways. The nation's morale is just plummeting. Richard Nixon is about to win 49 states in the next election, which, if that doesn't blow your mind, it should blow your mind. But he won 49 states in that election because people were looking for something, and Nixon gave them something to believe in until he was unceremoniously, he removed himself from office to avoid being removed from office because he was kind of a crazy person, if you don't know. But this is sort of the spirit of the age. Strikes are happening. Jobs are hard to come by. The airline industry is in a lot of trouble. All of this is going on in 1971 when D.B. Cooper pulls off the most daring feat of criminality ever. And let me just tell you, you guys know me. I am all about law and order. I'm a law and order guy. Like, if one day the Lord comes down and gives me singing ability, I'm not playing Jean Valjean. I'm playing Javert. That's how I feel about the law. But when it comes to D.B. Cooper, and I would say, I think this is universal. I don't care if you're in law enforcement, the FBI, where you are. There is something about D.B. Cooper that makes you want to root for the guy. We're going to talk about what happened in a second, but just the thought of him standing, the back doors of that plane are opening, and he rips off his tie and jumps out the back of that airplane. Man, they just don't make him like that anymore. So I'm excited about this case. Some of this might be in the hangover from Alabama just going to the Final Four. I'm just going to throw that in there. But I'm excited about this case.
I hope you guys just have caught all of the excitement because whether it's Bama winning or not, it's not. This is just that type of a case. And setting the era is also so important because we're about to dive into what was happening in the airways, apparently, all the time around this time, which makes what D.B. Cooper does even more fantastical because of the history surrounding what was happening at the time. But I hope you guys have all caught fire because this isn't going to take one episode. I don't know how many episodes this is going to take because there's so much to talk about. And here's the thing. We love mysteries, and we've known folks in the FBI who have touched this case before. Even if it's as simple as, because, the FBI investigated it. They had an open case on it for quite a while until more recently where they said they were not actively investigating it. I don't know about you, Brett. I can't help myself but ask every FBI agent I've ever worked with or know what they think about D.B. Cooper. And the second I say, I have one question to ask you, and it could be anything, right? All the grotesque murders and, child sex rings that they're doing. And they brace themselves for what salacious investigation I'm going to ask them about that maybe I don't have the clearance to know about. And they're like, ooh. And then I say, D.B. Cooper, their face immediately blows up with delight. And I bet if any of them solved it or caught D.B. Cooper, they would high five the man and let him go on his way.
There you go. Amen. They want to know the truth and then let it go. And in case you don't know this, the FBI has officially washed their hands of this case. They've said, look, we're closing this case. We don't think we can solve it. Turning it over to all you sleuths out there. So maybe you'll be the one to solve this case. We're going to tell the story. We're going to walk through a lot of the potential suspects. Though I got to tell you, I got a theory about who it is. I don't care who it is. This is one where I almost would rather not know. I don't know if you guys have ever seen The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, but there's a line at the end. In fact, I think it's the very last line. And when he says, when the truth becomes legend, print the legend. And that's what we got here. The legend is what matters. So let's get into it, because some of y'all may not even know anything about this case. So if you don't, congratulations, because there's 1,000 books. There's some great documentaries. There's some great podcasts. I'll just name a few that we relied on. Listen to this. Some of you turned me on to Astonishing Legends a while ago. Great coverage of this case. They did 3 episodes on it. They're good documentaries. There's a fine documentary on Netflix. Fantastic documentary on HBO. The documentary on HBO is one of the best true crime documentaries I've seen. If you're into D.B. Cooper, check that one out. There's a lot of great books. Into the Blast, which is a fantastic name for a book. You should check that one out. And then there's a bunch of other ones. The Last Master Outlaw, I think. And then Who is D.B. Cooper? There's a lot of great books. that you can read about this case. Most of them take a position on who D.B. Cooper is. So, always good to remember that. But you have so much, if you enjoy this story, so much you guys can look into, and you should look forward to it. Generation Y, we got to meet the Generation Y guys a few weeks ago. Great guys. They've done this case. Pretty much every podcast except us has done this case. So now we are joining the Legion. But let's talk about the case. So as I said, we're going back to 1971, and not just any time in 1971, just before Thanksgiving 1971, when a man dressed in an all-black suit and a black clip-on JC penny tie with an ivory tie clasp hijacks a Northwest Orient Airlines flight headed for Seattle, Washington. To this day, the identity of the hijacker and the whereabouts of both him and the money have never been discovered, making this one of the greatest mysteries in American history. Now, by 1971, you might not know this. This kind of blew my mind. I actually learning about this. Hijacking. We think about hijacking now, and it's hard to think about hijacking and not think about 9/11. And since 9/11, there really haven't been any hijackings. But growing up, hijacking was up there with the Bermuda Triangle and quicksand is one of the things that you worried about if you were alive in sort of the 80s. Really the 80s. By the 90s, I think it had died down. But it was something that you knew about. And there was a reason for that. In the 70s, hijacking was an international problem. According to the podcast Infamous America, which did another great series of episodes on this case, from 1968 to 1972, a 4-year period, over 300 aircraft were hijacked worldwide, about one every 6 days. These hijackings were dubbed skyjackings because, obviously, we're taking over a plane. They always thought, I don't know where the word hijacking comes from, but it seems like hijacking would work for planes too because they're high up. But I guess it's not H-I-G-H. But nevertheless, I feel like you could just go with hijacking. But skyjacking works too. And they have become a fixture in American media. Now, typically they were harmless. No casualties were involved. But that wasn't always the case. And they also were not typically successful. A lot of them actually were people hijacking airplanes and demanding that they fly to Havana, Cuba, because there was no way to get to Cuba. Obviously, there was an embargo then and basically still one today. But people would hijack the planes and take them to Havana. And this became such a problem that there was actually discussion of building a fake Havana airport in the Florida Keys so that they could fly to Havana, release the hostages, then arrest the guy, and he's not actually in Cuba. The problem with that was they realized we'd do that once, and that'd be great. We spend a whole lot of money on that first hijacking, but then from that point forward, everybody would know we haven't flown far enough to get to Havana. So they abandoned that, and they decided to do things like put in air marshals. Now, you might be wondering, why not just increase security? Well, this was a pretty big political issue at the time. It was a recession. It was a big recession for the airlines, too. They weren't making a lot of money, and the thought was, if we're going to do security, the airlines are going to pay for it. That was not popular with the airlines. The response of the federal government was, we'll put armed people on the planes, and maybe they can stop it. Unfortunately, there's not an armed person on every plane, and it took a while to get to a point where you would have security at airports. In 1971, you didn't go through a metal detector. You didn't get patted down. You literally walked up to the counter, bought a ticket without an ID, and then went to your plane. And that's what you did. And that's why a situation like this was possible.
And can we talk about this real quick? It's not like in 1971, no one had been hijacking planes, and so there wasn't a need for security. By this time, we were already like 4 years deep into hundreds of skyjackings. So, I mean, we're not talking like, oh, it's taking us a year to kind of look back on our metrics for the last year. Guys, there were like 300 hijackings last year. We should probably do this whole security thing. We're talking like 4 or 5 years later, they're like, you know what? There are a lot of skyjackings, but yes, please walk on in, smoke your cigarette, wear whatever you want, be whoever you want, sit wherever you want, and maybe hijack us because the chances are high. I mean, I'm not victim blaming, and I'm not saying they asked for it, but there were not a lot of barriers to these skyjackings, which may explain why they were so plentiful.
The pilot of this plane would later say that he would often go speak to elementary school students about his job, and the first question was always, have you ever been hijacked? That's how bad it was at the time. So on this day, and we're going to talk more about some of these hijackings and how they went down, but on this day, we're in 1971, as I said, just before Thanksgiving Day. And that is when a man is going to walk into the Portland International Airport by the name of, not D.B. Cooper, but Dan Cooper. Now, unbeknownst to everyone around him, Cooper was about to pull off one of the most notorious crimes in American history and the only unsolved skyjacking that we know of in world history, and create decades of mystery that would leave the nation wondering, who is D.B. Cooper?
These days, a lot of people are learning about all the benefits of fasting, like weight loss, mental and physical performance, and gut health. But worry about the whole not eating part. Well, that's exactly why Prolon was created. Introducing Prolon, a revolutionary plant-based nutrition program that nourishes the body while making cells believe they're fasting. Researched and developed for decades at the University of Southern California Longevity Institute and backed by leading U.S. medical centers, Prolon helps promote healthy blood sugar, support cardiovascular health, and reduce abdominal fat. But Prolon isn't a diet. Prolon is science. Science based on Nobel Prize-winning discoveries in medicine. And this all starts with Prolon's 5-day program. Snacks, soups, and beverages all designed to keep your body in a fasting state. It's unlike anything you've ever experienced.
Guys, when we got this, I thought, I don't know if this is going to work. I had done sort of juice cleanses before. I was sure that Prolon would be good for me, but I wasn't sure that I could make it. But I got to tell you, I did all 5 days, and the fact that you're actually eating while doing it made it so much easier. I learned a lot more about my body. I learned a lot more about what I eat. I learned a lot more about what I needed to eat. It was a fascinating experience, and it's one, frankly, I would recommend to anybody. And right now, Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 10% off their 5-day nutrition program. Go to prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's prolonlife.com/prosecutors for this special offer. That's prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
All right, guys. Just because this is one of the most famous and exciting legends and historical true crime stories we've covered doesn't mean we shirk our typical path. So let's go to the timeline, because the timeline tells us a lot as well. Let's go back to November 24th, 1971. Sometime in kind of the mid-afternoon of that day, a man who appeared to be in his early to mid-40s walked into the Portland International Airport. He was wearing a dark suit, white shirt, black clip-on tie, and a raincoat. Now, this isn't that unusual. He did kind of look like a Men in Black sort of figure. Except back in the day, people actually dressed themselves with some sort of respect when they went to the airport to fly. If you remember the movie Catch Me If You Can, people dressed to the nines to get on the airplane. People did not go in athleisure or worse, as I do, when you get on an airplane. So
Pajamas.
The fact that he was dressed in a suit, pajamas, exactly. The fact that he's in a suit actually is pretty normal. And I'm sorry, I just get a kick out of the fact that he had a clip-on tie. I know we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but it's like he knew he was going to rip off that tie. You know what's kind of hard to do when wind's in your face if you're trying to get a tie that's around your neck that's been tied off? You don't want any drag. But if you got a clip-on tie, which I typically make fun of, right? Like, who wears clip-on ties except for my toddler boys who don't know how to tie a tie, and, I don't know, a high school boy who's going to his first prom. Something like that, right?
I'm only wearing clip-ons from now on, in honor of D.B. Cooper.
That's the thing, though, because it's kind of like you're not as manly if you wear a clip-on tie, unless you're about to rip it off in James Bond style as you fly out of a plane, right? Feet first. So all to say is I love the clip-on aspect of it, because I'd like to think that D.B. Cooper thought about this ahead of time, and this was going to be his signature move, and he did it with the clip-on tie. So that's what he was wearing. Now, today, this would be a major flag, but no one seemed to notice the fact that this man had no luggage, with the exception of a briefcase and a small paper bag. To this day, when I travel like this, like if I have a day trip to another city and I'm like direct flight there, direct flight back, and I'm only gone for about 12 hours, and I have just a briefcase, I literally think, do people think I'm DB Cooper? But I'm never that cool.
Yeah, Alice, when we were going up to Lidditz to talk about DB Cooper, we literally flew up there that morning, talked to the kids, had a fish and chips and an awesome pint at the local English pub, because that's the kind of place Lidditz is, and then flew back. And I didn't have a bag. And Alice was like, you're totally going to get pulled by security because you don't even have a bag. And I didn't. But you're right. That is a red flag.
Not in this day. So this man walks up to the counter and he purchased a one-way ticket for Northwest Orient flight number 305 to Seattle Tacoma International Airport that departed at 2:50 that same day. That ticket cost just $20, which he paid for in cash. And when asked for a name to print on the ticket, he identified himself as Dan Cooper. But at this time, no formal identification was required, and he did not show any. So while he said his name was Dan Cooper, there is absolutely nothing to back that up. A few things to note. You can walk into an airport the day of to buy a plane ticket and leave like within the hour with no identification and no luggage, and no one bats an eye. Because this was, $20 is not nothing in 1971, but I think inflation adjusted, it's something that if he was a businessman who needed travel, he could do it for that day. The one-way ticket aspect, again, if you're ever on a no-fly list or being flagged for extra security, these are all things that they now flag you for. A one-way ticket, paid for in cash, no luggage.
I've pointed out that I always get pulled over by security, right? Have I pointed that out? Have I told that story?
Tell us about your alter ego, why don't you?
My alter ego? Yeah. I know I've told this story, but for those of you who haven't listened to every single episode we've done, shame on you. Whenever I fly internationally and they actually run my name through the system, I always get taken back into the darkened rooms where they beat you and strip search you. Because apparently there is a person with my name, my exact name, in the same birthday, born in the same city, who has a warrant out for their arrest in Florida. So if you are listening, other Brett, you need to go turn yourself in because you're causing me undue trouble. And so they always have to take me back.
Literally, what are the chances?
I know, seriously. And they kept doing it, and I didn't know why. And then one of my friends figured it out and, looked it up. Somebody tried to, I'm not going to say they blackmailed me with this, but one of our many people who don't like me, which, as you know, are many, found this and emailed me about it. I know your secret. And I was like, yeah, you should just go public with that. You should just totally talk about the warrant for my arrest. You absolutely should do that. Because I'm sure that has to be me. How would I have, it's amazing. The government gave me a security clearance and I have a warrant out for my arrest. I'm a prosecutor with a warrant out for my arrest. But you're a smart guy.
And you appear on YouTube all the time.
I appear on YouTube all the time. But you're obviously a very smart guy, so you should run with that. And they didn't, and it made me sad. I really wanted them to, but they didn't. So
I really do think that's crazy. If I didn't know you and somewhat trust you, I would be like, you are absolutely that guy.
Sure you are.
Sure, you are not that same guy born in the same city.
Is Cooper.
Yeah, you wish. Speaking of which, a lot of people are going to claim they're going to be Cooper, which is what makes this even more interesting.
That's what I'm doing on my deathbed.
Everyone wants to be Cooper.
Be like, I was
you should do it. You should do it on your live bed right now.
Here you go.
You're saying you're DB
I'm admitting
Cooper.
it. It was me all along. I'm actually 82. I just look great because I've been taking care of myself.
With all that money, you sure can. Okay, guys, we got to get through this story. So, though this is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and it's a notoriously busy travel day even back in 1971, this is just a 30-minute flight, and it was only 1/3 full. So Dan Cooper, after he bought this last-minute ticket, was one of the last people to board the aircraft before its departure. And once on board, he walked all the way to the very back of the plane, and he took a seat in 18C, the last row just before the bathrooms, and he had the entire row to himself because it was a relatively empty flight. Now, before takeoff, 23-year-old stewardess Florence Schaffner began her duties on board Flight 305. Now she starts taking drink orders, and this is just a lost art. Like, I'll get on an hour-and-a-half flight, and they're like, there's no time, guys. There's no time to serve you peanuts and water. This is a 30-minute flight. And sweet Florence Schaffner is making sure the drinks are taken. And she starts taking these drink orders, and she approaches this man sitting at the very back in seat 18C. He puts in an order that's pretty typical, nothing to raise an eyebrow about. He orders a bourbon and soda, and he pays for his $1 beverage with a $20 bill. Now, pretty big differential there. Florence was not able to make change at that precise moment, but she promises the man she'll come back with it later in the flight. And so this man sitting in 18C sips on his bourbon and soda and kicks back for a flight to infamy.
And D.B. Cooper loved him some 20s, as we're going to talk about later. He's paid for his plane ticket with a 20. He's now paid for his bourbon with a 20. And if he made it out of this flight, he paid for everything with 20s from that point forward. So, but at this point, as Alice said, he's ordered his drink, either because he just really likes bourbon, like me, more evidence that I am D.B. Cooper, or maybe he's a little nervous. You know, we talked about this some with the kids. There's going to be things that happen in this case, and the assumption is always D.B. Cooper, master criminal. Everything he did was deeply thought out and perfect. We tend to do that with criminals, no matter who they are. Serial killers, we do it. D.B. Cooper. We turn them into geniuses who make no mistakes, when in fact they're just regular people with regular nerves who make mistakes all the time. And that might be happening here, but he's definitely having himself a drink. So he sits there, sipping bourbon, which, as Alice said, is not that unusual. But first clue for those of you out there who want to figure out who this is, he's also smoking cigarettes, but not just any cigarettes, Raleigh cigarettes, a relatively rare brand. One of those things when you're looking at cases, when you're trying to figure things out. You know, Alice and I have had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of ongoing investigations. May or may not be in the middle of one right now. And it's always interesting when you're looking at little things about the case, little things the person does that separate them from the average person. And those things can be huge. Those can be the things that separate the person who did it from everybody else. And this is one of those small things. Raleigh cigarettes, not a common cigarette, but he is smoking those cigarettes that day. Now, he doesn't appear distressed or nervous. And this is one of the things about D.B. Cooper that I think is another reason he's so cool. You know, those of you who watched Loki know that they made this incident into part of Loki. And there's a reason for that, because the man is sitting there in his suit and his tie, smoking his cigarettes and drinking his bourbon, seeming just cool as a cucumber despite what he is about to do. Now, at this point, Captain William Scott and his co-pilot, they are readying the Boeing 727 for takeoff. Interesting thing about this, when Dan Cooper bought his ticket, he made a point of asking the ticketing agent what kind of plane he was getting on. Now, you might do this now to make sure you're not flying on a Boeing Max, but in this case, he wanted to fly on a Boeing 727, and that is exactly the kind of plane he's flying on. And the Boeing 727 had an interesting aspect to it. The rear stairs lowered, and you could get on and off the plane from the rear stairs. And this was valuable because a lot of airports at the time didn't have the jetways that you're familiar with. So people had to exit on the tarmac and walk to the airplane. So having two sets of stairs, one in the back and one in the front, made everything much easier.
I really do wonder if, obviously he had done some research. He knew what types of flights, short flights, would be the Boeing 727. But I just wonder if he had asked the ticket counter lady, is this a Boeing 727? And she responded, no. Would he have looked for another flight? Because then that kind of gets a little bit, well, never mind. Let me instead fly to Kentucky. Is that a Boeing 727? No, sir. Well, then what about Nevada? Nevada? Anywhere in Nevada? Then that definitely raises flags. Or so would he have just kind of said, oh, you know what? I'll be back and come back another day, and this wouldn't have happened. I don't know.
I don't know either, but I kind of think he would have. I think this was integral to his plan, as we're going to see. So I think he had to do it. He had to know. Otherwise, he didn't want to waste that 30 minutes flying to Seattle, Tacoma. So at this point, the plane is ready to take off. So Florence Schaffner, who is one of our stewardesses, the 23-year-old stewardess, she takes a seat in the jump seat at the back of the plane as the aircraft begins to gain speed so that it can take off. The jump seat, as you know, that's where your stewardesses sit whenever they're taking off, or when the captain makes that annoying announcement over the intercom that the service is over because it's going to get bumpy and they need to take care of themselves, which I totally understand, but it's annoying when you don't get your drink, but that's fine. D.B. Cooper would have been annoyed if he hadn't got his bourbon, but it's okay. So she sits in the back of the plane. But a few minutes later, the man from 18C, and there is debate to this day about whether or not he sat in 18C or 18B, but we're going to go with 18C, turns around, because she's right behind him, and hands her a note. Now, she does not read said note. Instead, she puts it in her pocket without looking at it, assuming the man is making a pass at her, something she is not unfamiliar with. Now, you young whippersnappers out there who with your modern thoughts about the relations between men and women and the ways you treat stewardesses are probably shocked by the fact that he would do this. But unfortunately, at the time, stewardesses had to endure a lot of this sort of sexual harassment on planes. They got a lot of passes from men. They got hit on all the time.
And there were a lot of strict requirements for how you were to look if you were a stewardess as well. Again, taking you back to the movie, Catch Me If You Can, it was a very difficult position to get. I mean, it was like being cast for a movie to fly on these airplanes. By 1971, maybe had relaxed a little bit, but it was still a very coveted position to have. They were still, I think, almost exclusively young, attractive women. And so Florence here, I think she probably got quite a few of these notes, and this was just another one of them. She just wanted to pass her drinks out, get over this 30-minute flight, go home for Thanksgiving. She didn't have time for yet another proposal for marriage.
And so Florence, just a little aside here, because this will give you an idea of how this was. Florence, when she was hired, had to submit her measurements to the airline. And she found the job very stressful at first, and so she stress ate, and she gained weight. And the airline actually took her off the plane, put her on unpaid leave, and told her to lose weight. So she had to lose weight so that she could continue her job as a stewardess. And one of the reasons they did this, the stewardess thing, there were two reasons. Number one, I'll give three reasons. Number one, they're a bunch of sexist. That's the first reason. Number two, the airlines at the time were mostly businessmen and business. Watch Mad Men. Okay, pretty accurate description of the time period. Businessmen wanted their stewardess to be very attractive. The third reason, which is pretty interesting, at the time, planes crashed a lot more than they do now. It's been a long time since we've had a major air disaster in the United States, and people were afraid of flying, more so than they are now. And so apparently the airlines did a bunch of studies about what are the kind of things that would make you feel better about flying. And one of them that came back, literally, was have attractive women on the plane. So stewardesses, one of the reasons that in the 60s and 70s, advertisements for airlines were like advertisements for a Playboy was because they wanted to present to the public, come live your dreams with all these beautiful women on the plane. Don't worry about crashing. It's not going to happen.
I mean, it's honestly how advertising works for lots of things that are really risky for you, like all your vices. There's a reason, like, fast food it has, like, beautiful people eating it, where I'm like, that girl has never had a Big Mac.
Right.
It's the same idea, right? Like, it's emulating what you think is happiness and joy and all good. Don't worry about the crash statistics.
So she gets this note and she thinks, oh my goodness, another man hitting on me. So she just slips it into her pocket. She probably never would have read it. But Cooper, noticing that she's done this, leans over and says, Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb. A panicked Schaffner at this point removes her note from her pocket and reads frantically. It says, in very nice handwriting, written with a felt tip pen. Miss, I have a bomb in here. I would like you to sit by me.
So Florence looks up, and Cooper is motioning at the seat next to him, implying that she should sit. She asks if he is serious, and Cooper responds by opening his briefcase, remember the one item other than the paper bag that he brought onto the plane, ever so slightly, where Florence could see 8 cylinders connected to red wires and a large battery. She doesn't ask another question. She sits down. Now, another flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, notices that Florence seems to be spending a lot of time over at seat 18C. She's getting a little bit annoyed. There's a whole plane full of people to take care of. Tina doesn't know what Florence is doing back there, so she walks over to see what's going on. Florence shows Tina the note, and Tina immediately walks to the phone and calls the cockpit. Captain Scott answers the call, and by this point, the plane had reached over 10,000 feet in elevation, and the cabin has been pressurized. Now, Captain Scott contacts ground control and the airline's headquarters, as you should when you have notification that a man on board has a bomb and is in the process of skyjacking your plane. And the crew believes the man's threat, but at this point, his motivation isn't clear. He hasn't asked for anything yet. All we know is there is a bomb on board, 10,000 feet in the air, in a pressurized cabin with many innocent people on board. The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening to us talk, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more.
So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who save with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
That is, until moments later, when Cooper provides Florence Schaffner with a list of his demands. He's very clear. He wants $200,000 in a backpack, fuel ready on the ground when they land, and 4 parachutes, specifically 2 front packs and 2 back packs. Because the plan was to land the airplane, get the things that he had requested, and take off again. I say this because I was very confused the first time I read this. I was like, what, how is he going to get these things? Is this like literally Mission Impossible style where another plane is going to be like upside down fueling you from above? No, he had thought this through. And remember where he's sitting, at the very back of the plane. So other than the stewardesses and the captain, and probably his co-pilot, no one else knew what was going on. He was yet just another man, sitting in the back of the plane, sipping his bourbon and soda, seeming to have a lot of attention from these young stewardesses. Again, probably not that uncommon. Now, at this point, Cooper puts on a pair of sunglasses. If you've ever seen a picture or a rendering of D.B. Cooper, you've probably seen him with sunglasses on. And all the while, he maintains his calm composure and politeness to the crew. Notice, even before he probably wrote the note before he got on the plane, he wrote Miss, not something derogatory, or even just jumping straight in. He's actually quite polite, and this carries through. Puts on his shades for, I guess, some anonymity. Maybe it's bright with all his grandeur as he's on this airplane getting everything he's been dreaming of. But that is the scene we have now.
And D.B. Cooper, one of the things everybody on the plane says about him is that he was incredibly polite. I mean, just the gentleman skyjacker the whole time. He's polite with everyone. And as Alice said, that will continue throughout this. There's a couple things to point out. One is there's only one passenger on the plane who actually notices D.B. Cooper, and I think you'll get a kick out of why this is. He is the only other person sitting in the back of the plane. He's actually sitting in the row across from D. Brett Cooper. And he is a college student who is going back home for Thanksgiving. And he's got his eye on Schaffner, the flight attendant. He totally intends to make the pass on her that D.B. Cooper made on her, or that she thought D.B. Cooper was making on her. And he was irritated because he's like, why is this flight attendant sitting with this guy this whole time? She needs to come over here so I can talk to her.
And this old guy, too, because he's in his 40s, and I'm this, like, I'm with you. She's 23. He's also, about the same age.
Yeah, so he's irritated by this. So he's one person who notices D.B. Cooper and will provide some information about him later on. You also have, once again, clues. We're just going to highlight clues as we go through. And we may come back and talk about some of this later too. But front packs and backpacks. That is sort of an antiquated way to refer to parachutes. The back parachute is a main chute. It is a chute that you will depend on when you jump out of a plane. The front chute, you would, if you're into skydiving, and this is probably when we discovered that Alice has skydived, is your reserve chute. And so that's what the front pack is. So you'll often hear that he asked for 4 parachutes. And it's often thought, why did he need 4? Were 4 people going to have to jump on a plane? No, he really asked for 2 sets of parachutes, a front and a back parachute.
Have you not skydived?
I have not. I can't say that.
Have you really not?
I have not. Have you? Of course you have.
Of course I have.
Of course you have.
You strike me as someone who would have skydived, though. I went skydiving in New Zealand.
I've only lived one life.
If you're in New Zealand,
Alice, instead of like
Me
30
too.
lives like you've lived.
I mean, I didn't skydive alone because you have to, dive like 300 hours or whatever before you can, not tandem dive. So I certainly did not dive alone. I prefer skydiving much more to bungee jumping because there's no point of reference for that whole drop in your stomach sort of thing. You don't reach the level of acceleration. So it doesn't feel like a roller coaster. It feels like floating. So if you have a fear of heights, jump out of a plane. Don't jump off a bridge because that's terrifying.
Now, one thing you may already be wondering is, did he really have a bomb? Is this a real bomb? Well, the 8 cylinders in his briefcase were described as being red and were assumed to be dynamite. And if this were a Wile E. Coyote cartoon, they would be dynamite. But dynamite isn't actually red. So most people think that these are probably road flares or some sort of false dynamite that he just did up to make it seem like he had a bomb, but he didn't actually have one.
And of course, I mean, I don't know about you, just like game theory, if there was no security and I knew I was going to skyjack a plane, I don't think I would risk having a real bomb because if there was some sort of scuffle, this is why if you carry a weapon, you have to be prepared for someone to use it against you, right? That's why you shouldn't just if you have no training in firearms, you shouldn't just carry a firearm because someone more skilled in that particular weapon can always wrest it away from you and use it against you. So with these bombs, he doesn't want it to actually go off, right? He has a mission. This plane is going to get him $200,000 and then to Cuba or somewhere else. And so if I were him, game theory wise, do you really want to test to see if this is a bomb when you're already 10,000 feet in the air? The answer is no. So I'm just going to assume this is a bomb, but I don't have to risk actually going and putting a bomb together and accidentally having it set off by someone during a scuffle, or I'm stupid and drop it and blow it up and I kill myself when all I wanted was $200,000. So I don't think it was a real bomb in there.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. But he had certainly faked everybody out at this point. So at this point, Schaffner takes the list of demands to the captain while Mucklow stays with Cooper. She's lighting his cigarettes for him and freshening up his drink. You're probably thinking out there, man, those cigarette butts, I think it'll be awesome evidence. We probably can get DNA and do genetic genealogy, and maybe we can do that with his glass too, and that would be awesome if the FBI hadn't lost all the cigarette butts in the glass. So, moving on. The captain calls
Do you
headquarters.
think they actually did that? Or like they just had a DB Cooper party where they all smoked the rest of his cigarettes pretending to be DB Cooper for one night? They're like, guys, we're never going to find him anyway. He's probably died at this point when we're closing the case. So let's just all take a butt and we get to smoke. It's like your ultimate champagne glass. I think that's what happened. I don't think they lost it.
I think there's a lot of people in true crime who'd agree with you and think that that's probably what actually happened.
Just by the way, I don't think that actually happened.
The reality, despite
do
what you
live in a
may
crazy
hear
world.
on various podcasts and everything else, is that evidence gets lost all the time, unfortunately, and this is an example of that, where they have lost this very critical evidence that could have proven exactly who D.B. Cooper was.
And here's why. It's not as critical in 1971. Right? Other than the fact that it is this particular brand, they don't know that genetic genealogy is going to be where it is half a century later. And when you're talking about, let's say there's just one bag of cigarettes from this one case in 1971. We know there were 300 other skyjackings in this time period. Imagine all of the evidence plus all the other crime. I mean, truly, it is an actual storage capacity situation. We face this in our own investigations that are not nearly as sexy as DB Cooper, where we have to pay storage fees on like stupid things that we had to collect from a crime scene that are not seemingly that important, but because they're part of the crime scene, we cannot get rid of them. And we're talking like someone had a weird collection of Beanie Babies. And they take up a lot of space, and you have to collect all of them. And this is not a hypothetical. And you have trash bags upon trash bags of darn Beanie Babies that can't get rid of that don't have to do with the crime. The crime had nothing to do with Beanie Babies, but it actually may have been fruit of, illegal funds. So stuff like that happens, and you'll have to answer to someone when they have to pay a storage fee every month. Do we still need this evidence? And when you're like 50 years removed from a case, sometimes the answer is like, no, we don't really need this. So sometimes things are disposed of when you really think the case is over, there's nothing more value you can get from it, or it truly is lost because things are being shuffled around in all these storage facilities all over the country to make room for storage facilities closer to where your investigation's happening for the more imminent cases. That's how things get lost. It's truly a human error situation.
And if someone was arrested today for the D.B. Cooper hijacking, the fact that they lost all this evidence would not be a reason to dismiss the case. Just throwing that out there in case you were curious. So,
sorry. You just got like so meta. Within a case within a case.
So meta. So in addition to his demands for money and parachutes and fuel, there are 4 rules Cooper has outlined that must be followed. If not, he says he will not hesitate to detonate the bomb. The first one is don't tell the other passengers. The second is stay in the air until all his demands are met. Now, that doesn't mean bring the money to the plane, but have the stuff ready to go on the ground so they can land, get it, refuel, and take off as quickly as possible. He wants the demands met by 5 p.m., which at this point is only less than 2 hours away, so not a lot of time. And going back to how nice he is, he wants meals to be provided to all the passengers and the crew. And he says, go ahead.
This I kind of like. It goes to the gentlemanly aspect. But here's the other thing. The passengers were expecting a 30-minute flight. And 30 minutes, you could probably live without a snack. I snack all the time. 30 minutes, I can live. 2.5 hours or 2+ hours, you can imagine people start getting antsy. They start asking questions. They start standing up. They start messing with your plan. So this is actually a very smart part of his plan, because if it's going to keep people seated a little bit longer, make them comfortable, they forget how long they've been in the air because you're in the plane, you may not have checked your watch, we don't have cell phones at this time, feed them, they're not hangry, your plan continues to go undetected.
He says, no funny stuff, or I'll do the job, which is a great line. I love that. So at this point, he also tells Tina Mucklow that she is going to be the one in charge of retrieving the money and the parachutes upon landing. So she's going to have to go out, get the money, get the parachutes, and bring it back into the plane. Now, by this point, the aircraft is circling the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Remember, this is only a 30-minute flight. This is a short flight. This is an up and down flight. And officials on the ground are frantically working to meet the hijackers' demands. Local law enforcement, FBI agents, officials from Northwest Orient, and airport administrators are gathered to assess the threat. They make the determination to give in to the hijackers' demands and put Captain Scott in charge of the situation. Now, you may be surprised by that. Why are they giving in to his demands? We talked about how there had been a lot of hijackings, and a lot of them had not been fatal. But just before this, a year or so before this, there had been a hijacking where the FBI had taken the position we're not going to give in to the demands at all. And there is a back and forth between the captain of the airline and the FBI. And the captain is saying, look, this guy is serious. You need to refuel this plane. We need to do what this guy says. And the FBI is like, no, we will not give him any fuel. And the captain's like, you have to do this. I'm in charge of this plane. This guy is losing it. You need to put fuel in this plane. And the FBI answers by shooting out the tires on the plane. At that point, the hijacker loses it, ends up shooting the captain, his wife, who he had brought on this flight, and himself. And it becomes a huge scandal. The FBI is heavily criticized by their response to this. They tried to hide the back and forth between them and the captain. It was actually released by a federal judge in a subsequent lawsuit. And from that point forward, the FBI was super skittish about not doing what the hijacker wanted. So at this point, they are, let's do it. And Northwest Orient is also the position, let's give him what he wants. So that's what they're going to do. They're going to give in to his demands. Those on the ground in Seattle get to work. They quickly close the airport and they begin contacting local banks so officials can collect the money and catalog the serial numbers for the FBI investigation. We'll tell you more about that in a little bit. They then contact a local recreational skydiving company to provide the requested parachutes. The parachutes are actually the most difficult thing they have to find. The skydiving company was closed, and they just got lucky that there happened to be somebody there right before Thanksgiving who could help them with the parachutes that they needed.
And I do think this is so interesting and wonder if D.B. Cooper had some knowledge of the previous hijacking and his ability to basically be intimidating just by saying he's intimidating, because he's so polite. He's not losing it whatsoever. He doesn't intimidate Florence or Tina, and he's acting kind of like a gentleman as opposed to using curse words or appearing agitated, using force with his hands to grab people around him. And yet he really seems like the model criminal in terms of being a nice guy, yet they still give in to his demands. So I don't really think there was any situation where they weren't going to give in to someone's demands. Maybe someone who didn't even pretend to have a bomb, but it's a pretty low bar here. All to say is, if you can step back and look at the situation, D.B. Cooper quite literally is walking through this entire plan easily. Walks into the Portland International Airport, buys a ticket, walks on to the plane, the very last one, walks to the back of the plane, sits down, passes a note, and everything is just falling into place. Not that any crime is easy, but everything is truly going according to script for him. And I wonder how much of this is because of his planning and his brilliance. That's what I think it is, because of who he is now in lore. Or how much of this is that this is why there were 300 hijackings in this period.
That's a great point, Alice, because I tend to be of the opinion that everything that happened was planned out, whether it went according to plan or not. But it's a great point that even if he didn't have a plan, we assume he had a plan because it all worked out. But this is not a great time for law enforcement when it comes to hijacking. So maybe it's just, like you said, this is why these things are working, not some sign of his brilliance.
We're going to go with brilliance until proven otherwise. So at the same time in Portland, FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach is leading the investigation into the identity of the hijacker. He speaks with two employees from Northwest Orient who remember a man who, quote, seemed a bit off. He wore dark clothes and kept to himself, and the ticket agent is able to recall the man asking if the flight was on a 727 and is able to provide the name of the man who purchased the ticket, Dan Cooper. But again, no ID was required to purchase the ticket at the time, and the man paid cash, so there was no paper trail to help find his true identity. And Dan Cooper, now that we know it, Dan, probably the most common male American names, Cooper, also an incredibly common name. So the plane continues to circle the airport, and the weather outside takes a turn as rain begins pelting the aircraft. Remember, it's now been in the air factors longer than it should have been for the 30-minute flight. And the 5 p.m. deadline comes and goes. So the hijacker has Tina Mucklow call the cockpit to get an update on the situation on the ground. Cooper is getting a little, antsy. What's going on? I gave you a deadline. It's not being met. I am not happy with this. Now, Captain Scott calls the airport at 5:20 p.m. and is informed that 2 of the parachutes haven't arrived, quote, but the money is there and the fuel trucks are ready. I love this. You would think $200,000, which, by the way, in today's amount of money is about $1.5 million. I think a little bit less than that. So it's no small amount. They're able to kind of get that together from all the local banks in a matter of hours. And they're also able to get the fuel, which I would think that there's fuel at the airport, but they can't get the parachutes. It'd be a little bit hard to grab it off someone who's about to go skydiving, Sorry, sir, we need this for a hijacker. You're going to need to wait your turn. No, thank you. So they're still waiting on 2 of the parachutes. But the captain says, you know what? This is the update to the hijacker. And he says, we have most of what you want, minus, the additional parachute you wanted. Do you want me to land the plane? And DB Cooper responds, yes, land the plane. Homes.com knows when it comes to home shopping, it's never just about the house or condo. It's about the home. And what makes a home is more than just the house or property. It's the location and neighborhood. If you have kids, it's also schools, nearby parks, and transportation options. That's why Homes.com goes above and beyond to bring home shoppers the in-depth information they need to find the right home.
And when I say in-depth, I'm talking deep. Each listing features comprehensive information about the neighborhood, complete with a video guide. They also have details about local schools with test scores, state rankings, and student-to-teacher ratio. They even have an agent directory with the sales history of each agent. So, when it comes to finding a home, not just a house, this is everything you need to know all in one place. Homes.com. We've done your homework. So at 5:39, the plane safely lands at the Seattle-Tacoma airport. One little thing that he says that's interesting, clue, this is another thing. He's looking out the window earlier before this over Tacoma and actually says to the stewardess, well, that's Tacoma down there. So he obviously had flown this route before. He recognized Tacoma from the sky. That may or may not be important. At this point, the fuel truck and a pickup truck with a ladder meets them on the tarmac, along with an unmarked police car. A large bag, a canvas bag, containing $200,000 in $20 denominations, is removed from the car. Tina goes down, grabs the bag, and reboards the aircraft. The 35 passengers aboard all exit the plane unharmed and utterly unaware that there has been a hijacking. They don't know that at this point. As DB asked, they weren't told. This is 2 hours after their scheduled arrival time, and they have no idea what's going on, though they will all be debriefed shortly thereafter. Mucklow, she then departs the plane yet again to get the parachutes. 2 flight attendants, including Schaffner and Alice Hancock, are instructed to get off the plane. Mucklow reboards to deliver the 4 parachutes to the hijacker. So at this point, if you're not keeping track, 2 of the stewardesses are gone. All the passengers are gone. This leaves us with the pilot, the co-pilot, and Tina Mucklow.
I think this is interesting. So Schaffner was the one that he had sit next to him and had passed the note. But she's the one who he gets off the plane. She spent, I think, the most time with him in closest proximity. I just think it's interesting tactically that he has her leave the plane because obviously the first thing that's going to happen is that she's going to be interrogated about what she saw, what she knows, what she remembers. But instead, he has Tina stay behind. I don't know. Maybe he was more sweet on Tina at this point. Meanwhile, the hijacker is growing frustrated. They landed later than he had demanded. Remember, he wanted a 5 p.m. deadline. It's well past 5 o'clock now. And one of the fuel trucks was malfunctioning, causing it to take longer than it should to refuel this plane. Now, this was actually a ploy by the FBI to slow things down. Who would think that the government would not have rightfully functioning things? Oh, shucks. This is just our regular operations, which, by the way, really is how things operate. But in this case, they had the malfunctioning refueling truck to slow things down, though the captain would later demand, hurry it up, guys, and the fuel truck miraculously fixed itself. Plane gets refueled, and there's one other thing that Cooper is frustrated about. Remember his list of demands? He asked for $200,000, but that's not it. He asked for the $200,000 in a backpack specifically. This money was not delivered in a backpack. It was delivered in a satchel. You may be thinking, what's the big deal? $200,000 in 20 denominations is 10,000 bills?
10,000 bills.
10,000 individual bills. Okay? So it's a lot. It's heavy. And a bag is something you're going to need. Now, what does a backpack have? Typically 2 straps that you can attach to your back. And might that be particularly helpful if you're going to, say, jump out of an airplane because it's attached to your body? A satchel, on the other hand, is a bag that could be open. It may have 1 strap. It's not meant to be on your body. It's to hang off of your body, which may be fine if you're walking to the grocery store, but not so fine if you're jumping out of an airplane at high speeds with wind whipping around, which could tear that satchel away from you. So you can imagine why Cooper is frustrated with the delivery method of the money. So he instructs Tina to close all the window shades on the airplane so no one outside can watch him. He then pops one of his reserve chutes. Remember the front pack parachute. And he uses a small knife to cut long pieces of cord from the canopy. Why would you do this? Because, a canopy or a parachute loses all its functioning properties once you cut into it. Well, he does have 4, so he has some extras. And it's believed that he was actually doing this to try and make some sort of strap for the satchel because he wanted the backpack to be able to strap the bag to his body.
So at this point, ground control, they call the cockpit to see if the last flight attendant on board, Tina Mucklow, can leave the aircraft. They relay this back to D.B. Cooper, and he says no, she needs to stay on. At this point, ground control suggests that the men in the cockpit try and escape via one of the cockpit windows using a rope ladder. And this is a moment of heroism for the captain and the co-pilot. They refuse adamantly. They will not do it. They are not going to leave Tina Mucklow alone on the plane with the hijacker and a bomb. So at this point, DB has some new instructions.
Chivalry's not dead.
Chivalry is not dead, even in 1971. He has a new set of instructions, and they are very specific. This is clue alert. Another clue alert. If this was pop-up video, there'd be a pop-up right now. So he says the plane should take off and proceed at a maximum altitude of 10,000 feet. The flaps should be down at 15 degrees. He also wants the landing gear deployed. He wants to take off with the rear air stairs down. He wants the plane to fly as slow as possible without stalling, and he doesn't want to pressurize the cabin, which is why he wants it at 10,000 feet, because that's when you would pressurize the cabin. And he wants the plane to go to Mexico City. These are very specific demands, and they indicate some knowledge about the aircraft and its abilities.
Real quick question, because I just feel like you would know this. What does pressurizing the cabin have to do with his plan? What is it that you can't open doors when it's pressurized, or that it causes certain destabilizations of the plane when you open the door?
Yeah, so if the plane was pressurized and you open the door, you would have a rapid depressurization event. And that would be bad if you were trying...
Like on the Boeing Max?
Exactly! Like when your door flies off in the middle of flight. Bad thing. You don't want that to happen. So it's much easier for him to do what he wants to do. If they're flying at 10,000 feet, he can open the door. The other thing about it is if they're flying at 10,000 feet, it's still breathable air. So even with the back stairway down, he can still breathe. If they were at 30,000 feet, well, if they were at 30,000 feet not pressurized, everybody would pass out. But certainly if you open the door, you would have a depressurization event and everybody would pass out. So you want them to stay low. And the other advantage to this is it's harder to track them. It's a little bit harder to track them if they're flying low and if they're flying slow. We're going to see this come in a little bit later when jets are actually going to be scrambled to try and track the plane, and they're flying too fast. They can't keep. They're zooming past it and having to turn around and come back. So this is a pretty smart thing he's doing.
And also, as you're beginning to see, and we'll see even more of, he knows a thing or two about the 727. He knows a thing or two about aeronautics, even if this is basic. They don't have Wikipedia back in the day, but he's not just some Joe Schmo off the ground. He at least has educated himself on this. The fact that he knows all these metrics and what can and cannot happen with this plane is why I believe all the other things are part of his plan and not just coincidence and not just pure luck. Because I would just like him to have this master plan where he's done all these physics proofs and he knows exactly what he needs to pull off the crime of the century. And this partly shows that he is in fact very knowledgeable about what he needs from this specific plane.
Well, I'll tell you who else is really worried about this is the captain. Because the captain's like, yeah, all those things you just asked us to do are impossible. We can't actually do that. If we do that, the plane won't take off or it'll crash. And he's like, no, actually, you absolutely can do it exactly the way I described. The captain doesn't think he can take off with the stairs down, and D.B. Cooper's like, no, actually you can. Now, he will eventually agree to allow him to take off without the stairs down, but D.B. Cooper is right. And very few people knew this, that you could take off with the stairs down, but Boeing knew it, and the military knew it.
What would be the purpose of Boeing making an airplane, a passenger plane, not a military plane, that could take off with stairs?
Well,
down?
There is no purpose to it, but the reason they knew it is because whenever you have a new aircraft, you always test the limits of what it can do. And that was one of the things they had tested. If the stairs, imagine the plane's taking off and the stairs fell down. There was some sort of malfunction and they dropped. What would happen? So they tested that and they'd actually found out, be fine. The plane would still be stable. It could still take off. Now, most people didn't know that. The captain certainly didn't know that, but D.B. Cooper apparently did, or he at least acted like, no, you could totally do that. He agreed to lower the stairs later on, but he was right about everything. Everything he described was perfectly doable. Now, there was one thing that wasn't doable. There's no way the plane could make it all the way to Mexico City doing all those things, because flying at 10,000 feet with the flaps down and the gear down dramatically increases drag on the plane and makes the engines work much harder. And what does that mean? They burn more fuel. So there was no way they were going to make it all the way to Mexico City. The captain tells him that, and they sort of talk about, well, where should we stop? The captain suggests Reno. D.B. Cooper says, yeah, Reno. It's a good town. And they decide they're going to stop in Reno, Nevada, before ultimately continuing on to Mexico City.
I don't know why that fact makes me smile so much, because it's kind of like, whatever, sure, everything else is so planned down to the, specific miles per hour you need to fly. And then it's like, Reno? Sure, let's do it. And here you're about to find out why he doesn't really care if it's Reno or another town. So at 7:40 p.m., more than 2.5 hours past his own deadline, the plane takes off. Tina Mucklow walks Cooper through how to lower the back stairs, though he does not require her assistance to actually do the lowering, which may mean that he's done this before or have some knowledge of it and may not have even needed her to show him how to do it. When she finishes, he pulls out 2 stacks of wrapped 20s, probably around $2,000 each, and he says, take it. It's yours. Shocked, she refuses. I mean, this is skyjacked money. Can you imagine if you walked off the plane with $4,000 and they're like, Tina, you were part of this. Clearly. There's nothing to hide. You have the actual marked money that is part of the skyjacking on you. Not to mention that, this is just shocking in general. She is a literal prisoner being held right now. But also, he's such a gentleman. She has done him what he needed, and he is rewarding her with a few $1,000s.
And let me just say, she was terrified that he was going to make her jump out of that plane. She thought the reason he got 2 parachutes is because he's going to take her as a hostage and jump out of that plane.
I would certainly think that.
Yeah.
I would certainly think that. It's to make sure no one chases you, right? Because they're still hot on the hunt. He knows that they're going to search for him. I mean, he's taking $1.5 million, right? This is not nothing. Not to mention that he's hijacked an entire plane and threatened the safety of everyone on board. But she refuses the money, and Cooper instructs Tina to join the rest of the crew in the cockpit. He no longer has a need for her. Now, fighter jets are trailing the plane, trying to track it, find out what's going on, hopefully catch DB Cooper. But they're actually having trouble maintaining visual contact due to the low speed of the hijacked plane. This is not that surprising because what are military jets for? Probably moving at a very high speed stealthily to track. Usually, we're not tracking something very slow. We're trying to get in and out of situations quickly. And so this plane is going so slowly that these fighter jets can't actually track them. Now, Special Agent Himmelsbach gets in a helicopter to try and locate the plane himself. But remember that really bad weather that had hit right before they landed? All that rain pelting the airplane? That bad weather system is still here. And it makes the helicopter tracking impossible. There is a full storm raging at this point. Now, FBI agents are also on the ground, and what do? Of course, these 35 passengers that had just come off and additional stewardesses, they start interviewing them. They make sure to get every single one of them, and these passengers are looking shocked. This is the first time they are learning that the plane they had just stepped off of had been hijacked. And the thing is, we'll find out more what these passengers remember and what they can tell the FBI. But basically, the answer is not much. They didn't even know this plane was hijacked. And other than the one guy who wanted to hit on the stewardess, everyone else was, in front of DB Cooper. Very smart of him. Think about the last time you were on an airplane or a bus or at the movie theater. How often did you look back? Probably not that often. Maybe not enough to be able to recall the features of someone sitting behind you. And that's probably what he was counting on. And he was right. There was very little information these passengers could give the FBI. Now, they took off at 7:40 p.m. At 8 p.m., remember, everyone on board other than Cooper are now in the cockpit, and they can't see what DB Cooper's doing. But at 8 o'clock, the captain notes a change in cabin pressure, meaning that the hijacker likely deployed the stairs at this time, causing that pressure change. So they call back to see if he needs help deploying the stairs, but he says, "No thanks, I got it." I wish I could hear that exchange because it's so nice of the crew as well. Like, "Are you doing okay there, buddy? This is really for the professionals. Do you need our help with it?" Right? They just want to get out of this unscathed, remember. And again, DB Cooper, the, ever gentleman, says, "Nope, I got it. Thanks for asking." And a few minutes later, really more than a few minutes later, 13 minutes later at 8:13 p.m., the crew sustained, quote, "sudden and sustained upward movement." So they make adjustments to make the plane level, and they call back to Cooper, but they hear nothing back at this point. He does not communicate again. The movement of the plane was not merely from Cooper jumping out of the plane. When he did so, the hydraulics in the stairway made it snap up and nearly shut before it then settled back into an open position. So that's what they had experienced. And that's why they think that he probably jumped around 8:13 p.m. Now notice the timeline there, though. The stairs open at 8 o'clock. Raging storm. I've never been. Well, one time, I guess, when I went skydiving, but it was not at this level, when the doors open and you're looking out into the abyss. But in this case, it's 7:40, November. You're not seeing anything. It is pitch black, right? And there's rain pelting, and there's wind gushing. It cannot feel good. I don't even like having my windows down when I'm driving on the highway because of the amount of pressure and wind on my face. Imagine that 100-fold with stairs down on a Boeing 727. And we don't know what he's doing during these 13 minutes. But he's not jumping. Instead, he's watching that rain batter the stairs, and he's feeling the wind and rain whip against his face. And he stands there, looking at what he's about to do for not a minute, not 2 minutes, not 10 minutes, 13 minutes before he takes leap into history.
And look, here's another pop-up video. For those of you who remember that, the pop-up is coming up because this could be a clue. This could be a man standing on the end of a staircase, 10,000 feet in the air, lightning flashing in the distance, thunder rolling, a 200-mile-an-hour wind blowing in his face, and him thinking, this was a bad idea. Maybe I should just climb back up the stairs and be like, yeah, let's just go on to Mexico City. That could be that. Or it could be a man looking down through the clouds, looking for something, a sign to tell him when he needs to jump because he is planning this whole thing out. Whether what it is, what he's doing at the end of that staircase for 13 minutes, we'll leave you to decide.
So an hour and a half later, the plane begins its final approach into Reno, Nevada, because remember, they're staying the course. They call the hijacker to let him know, but again, they receive nothing in return. They don't hear anything. The plane lands, and police and FBI storm the cabin. 2 of the parachutes are still on board, but D.B. Cooper is gone, as is the $200,000.
And that's where we're going to leave you today. With that finding, the FBI storming an empty plane. Rear stairway still open, by the way. They did have to land with the stairway open, apparently, and did it successfully. But no D.B. Cooper. And D.B. Cooper, nor any sign of him or remains of him, depending on what you think happened when he leapt out of the back of it, were ever found again. Next week, we're going to talk more about the investigation into this case, some interesting things about it that we've already hinted at, and then we're going to get into the suspects. And there are so many, and they are amazing. The suspects in this case are all amazing on their own. We could spend a year on this case if we wanted to, and there are some that do. The Cooper Vortex podcast on this case, which is entirely about D.B. Cooper, one to check out as well. You can spend as much time as you want on this case. You can spend the rest of your life on this case. If you watch that HBO documentary, you will find people who have spent their entire life on their case. We are not going to, but we are going to enjoy it, and we're going to have a lot of fun with it. Alice, before we sign off, do you want to answer a question tonight? I could talk to you guys all night tonight. I'm all about this. Okay, this is from J.E.C. Kamey from Dothan, presumably Alabama. Roll Tide. Sure you're an Alabama fan. Who says, are suspects or persons of interest privy to alleged evidence against them during interrogation? Specifically, investigators told Lindsay Buziak's boyfriend that they had a folder full of evidence against him.
No, you don't have like a Brady right to know all the evidence against you, but investigators will often rebut your lies with evidence they have to show you, and they may bluff as well to show that they have more evidence than they may really have as interrogation tactics to try and get to more information. So you don't have a right to know what they have against you, but just tactically, it usually helps to let the person talk. And if they're going to lie, it usually behooves you as the investigator to show them that you actually know more than they think you know, so that hopefully they will cooperate and stop lying to you.
And the other thing, as Alice said, they can lie to you all they want. They were lying in that case. Now, one thing that does occasionally happen is something we call a reverse proffer. In a reverse proffer, you bring someone in. A proffer, generally speaking, is when someone comes in and they tells you everything they know. That's what we call a proffer. We do that sometimes with people. We say, look, come in, tell us everything you know, and it'll go better for you at sentencing if you tell us the truth. You guys are aware of the ongoing sort of controversy about, what's that dude's name? Murdoch.
Liner? Oh.
Murdoch.
Murdoch.
He pled guilty, but part of his plea agreement was that he would pass a polygraph test. We don't normally do that with polygraph tests, but we do often have a requirement that you come forward and you tell us the truth. And if you tell us something we can prove is not true, you violated your plea agreement and you're going to get hammered. We often do that, and that's called a proffer. A reverse proffer is when you come in and we say, here's all the evidence against you. You probably should plead guilty. Because if you don't, we're going to go to trial, we're going to win, you're going to lose, and you're going to get a much stiffer sentence than you would otherwise. So there are circumstances in which you will actually share the evidence with the person, but as Alice said, you don't have any right to that, and you certainly don't have a right to that during an investigation.
Good question, though.
Great question. All right. Well, we know you guys love this case. We love this case. Let us know what you think. prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. We want to hear from you about this case. We know you love it. We love it. You love it. And we want to hear your theories because we know you have some crazy ones. We're going to be back next week. We'll dig more into this, and we have something special for you here after our sign-off. Something a little different than what we normally do. And you're going to hear that in just a second. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. All right, kids, hit it. Talking about?
D.B. Cooper.
What about D.B. Cooper?
D.B. Cooper stole the money.
Did he? How'd he get away with it?
Jumping out of the airplane.
Wow. Did he have anything to help him get to the ground after he jumped out of the airplane?
A parachute.
What's a parachute?
It helps him go slow enough so it can calm him down.
Oh, wow. Do you like D.B. Cooper?
Mm-hmm.
What do you like about him?
I like he jumped out of the airplane.
That's pretty cool.
I want to jump out of the airplane too with a parachute.
You do?
Mm-hmm.
What about the money?
Well, I want to have my own money.
They're so cute.
They're so great. They're great.
Pluto TV has over 300 channels and thousands of TV shows and movies for whatever mood you're in. Just open the app and something good will already be playing because it's curated by people who love TV as much as you do. So if you're in the mood for comedy, there's 18 channels that'll make you laugh. Looking for drama? We got so much of it, you'll cry tears of joy. Reality shows, game shows, sports, Star Trek, and even more Star Trek. No matter what mood you're in, there's something on Pluto TV. Just download the app and start streaming. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.